Welcome to the WakeUp Protocol. I am your host, Nadja Haldimann, and together we're having life-changing conversations with real people about spiritual awakening and the transformations that follow. We're mapping the messy path of awakening so you can go further faster and feel a little less alone along the way. For this episode of the WakeUp Protocol, I'm joined by Mary Cadera, a psychotherapist, longtime executive leader, and the woman who listened when her nervous system told the truth her job could no longer hold. Mary spent years in high-profile executive roles doing meaningful work on paper while living in a constant state of hyper-arousal, always scanning for danger, always bracing for what was next. Her awakening wasn't a single moment. It was a slow, honest reckoning. She began to notice the cost of success, not just in hours or energy, but in sleep, presence, and safety inside her own body. What followed was a courageous, deep, intentional transition out of corporate leadership and into work that aligns with her values, her purpose, and her capacity to feel regulated, connected, and at home in herself. In this conversation, we talk about nervous system regulation, the myth of constant happiness, money and safety, and why true fulfillment begins when we stop overriding ourselves. In this conversation, we talk about nervous system regulation, the myth of constant happiness, money and safety, and why true fulfillment begins when we stop overriding ourselves. Mary shares how alignment doesn't come from chasing more, but from creating enough safety to finally listen. This episode is a grounded reminder that a meaningful life isn't built on status or payoff, but on feeling safe, present, and true from the inside out.
Yes, it really was a coming out. It absolutely was. I think trying to maintain the old familiar things, 9-to-5 job really being the structure of it, but a 9-to-5 job being done in a certain way. Leaving that behind really was was that coming out. This is not for me anymore. And I appreciate you saying it was brave. And I can see in hindsight, yes, I also have to say that in many ways, I felt like it was my only option because I had exhausted the others. And while I could have continued experimenting maybe for years with trying different types of consulting, different ways of forming partnerships to offer services that felt a little bit more in alignment with my purpose and felt more fulfilling, I don't know if those small steps would have added up to where I am now. So something did have to give.
Mary Cadera, welcome to the WakeUp Protocol.
Thank you, Nadja. It's such a pleasure to be here.
We just had coffee together a week ago and talked about having you on my podcast. And I'm really, really looking forward to hearing about all the wisdom you have to share. You have come so far in the last 5 years and really taken a huge pivot from your corporate career where you were in executive leadership to the career that you have today as a practicing psychotherapist, and just everything it took to even acknowledge what it takes to be more in alignment with what your heart and Dharma wanted to guide you towards. We've known each other for probably 15 or 20 years or so. And the very first time you and I met, we were at a Burning Man related little party with a bus, one of those Burning Man art cars, and it was called Patty's Ark. It was on St. Patrick's Day, but it was just like Noah's Ark, and we were all dressed up as animals, and it was so cute. And we went bar hopping, and I just remember you were a zebra, and I was sort of a fuzzy little thing. I don't remember what. It was really cute. So I really cherished that moment and how we got to meet looking like that, and how far we've come over the years.
Absolutely. That time was such a playful time. And shout to my friend Betsy for providing that zebra outfit for me. What a great night. And I love that you're calling that night out, because that marked the beginning of friendships with a number of people in that crew. So I'd actually forgotten until you mentioned it. that was our origin story.
Yeah.
So I thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for bringing that back
So
up.
many amazing connections through that group.
Yeah.
Yeah. Your life has really taken a huge journey over the last 5 years. And I've been, as your friend, able to witness everything you've been going through. And it's quite inspiring. And I talk to a lot of people who feel stuck in the corporate world. And so did you. And I'm curious, where were you when you got to that conclusion that working as an executive leadership corporate person was no longer in alignment with your truth, and how you even came to recognizing and acknowledging that, and then taking the scary step of going from this beautiful paycheck but not so happy life, feeling stuck in, a lot of people describe it as feeling like a cog in the wheel.
Yes.
A cog in the
Absolutely.
wheel.
Yeah. Yeah.
So can you share a little bit about how that looked for you?
Yeah. Thank you. I think it was two things. It was one, becoming more aware of my dissatisfaction through connecting to my emotional state, realizing getting into bed at night, right? It was so hard to turn off, was constantly thinking about what next. Something in hindsight that I realized I was trapped in a cycle of constantly scanning for danger. I was in hyper-arousal, and that wasn't comfortable. And then the other thing that was happening was the contrast presented to me when I was doing work, and it was generally in the form of certain I'll call them tasks that were very much in alignment with my passion. And so between those two things, that push and pull of realizing I am very uncomfortable most of the time, and then having these beautiful moments of connection to certain elements of my job, which I'll get to in a moment, really helped me understand that while it was fine, I was doing okay, and I would even say great in a lot of ways, working on great projects, on interesting teams with smart people. I wasn't in myself. I wasn't doing work that was rewarding and enriching me in the way that I suspected it could. And so those glimmers, right, those what I referred to as tasks, which feels a little mechanical, right, because of the nature of those tasks, those things that were coming up in my day that really was lit up by, were those moments with individuals. So specifically in work that I was doing as chief of staff at a large organization, one of the things that I would do was meet with a number of new hires that were coming through the company. And there would be, of course, times, as with any large company, where there'd be a wave of new hires. And my effort to meet with them meant that I would sometimes have a full day of back-to-back meetings with new people. And those days of connecting with individuals, talking to them about what they were excited about, addressing concerns, helping them get connected. Often I would introduce them to other people in the company after learning what their interests were. Those were my best days. By a long shot, those were my best days. I would come home from those days feeling energized, as though my cup had been filled, as opposed to depleted. And that was, I think, my first sign that there was something else that I could be doing, that work didn't have to mean being in hyper arousal, being constantly scanning for danger. And that, I think, is what started my journey. Really, it took about 5 years towards where I am now.
And, looking back, those 5 years went by pretty fast. And here you are already in your new career. So I find it really interesting that you're talking about these little micro moments where you actually recognize that you felt more expansion versus contraction during the rest of the time. And just being in that state of, did you call it hyper arousal, or what did you call it?
Yeah. So hyper arousal is a nervous system concept. We have what we refer to as a window of tolerance, right? Where when we have things that happen to us, and the example I love to use is the car that cuts us off in traffic. I think for most people who drive cars, when that moment happens, it becomes an amygdala-based response to fight or flight, right? Our pupils dilate, our heart rate increases. And it's all in the interest of keeping us safe to allow us to respond in the moment. Those of us who are living within a wide window of tolerance, we can have these moments where our arousal spikes. And then we can very quickly resolve and get back to a baseline where our breath is normal, our heart rate is more steady, and we move on with our day. Hyperarousal is when we're outside the top of that window, when our nervous system is in a state of, generally it's a state of danger, right? We are not feeling like we can resolve the spike that has happened to us. And it means that we don't settle at the end of the day. I mean, to get right to the point, it means that if we're hyper aroused and we don't have tools to bring us back down to a more regulated baseline, we stay there. And I think most of us can relate, right? Those moments. And I think it's another really just good classic example when we get into bed at night, when ostensibly we should be ready to close our eyes and sleep and go into that beautiful, deep brain restoration process that sleep affords us. But we can't. We can't shut down. Our nervous systems are in a place where we're being communicated with in our system that there is still some danger that we need to be aware of. So yeah, hyperarousal. I think that is how so many of us in corporate America operate. It's really what capitalism encourages us to do, to always be thinking about what next, to be looking around the corner, to be scanning for opportunities, but also threats. And for many of us, if we're not paying attention, we get stuck there. And that was very much where I was at.
Being stuck in that place of the sympathetic nervous system. Is that correct? Yeah. And looking at it historically, and most of us have heard that story before, it used to be something that we needed to be there because if a saber-toothed tiger would come attack us, we could either run or we could hide or whatever, and then it would be over. But in this society that we're currently in, that's just constantly there, and it just keeps wearing us down. And then we have all that stress, and stress is very toxic for our bodies, for our health, for everything. So did you feel like you were in that state for a long period of time?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's one of these things that can build up without our awareness, because it can be subtle. And it's often, there are a few metaphors that I think cover this, right? And the simplest one is imagining a glass with an eyedropper dripping water into it, right? And that glass can hold a lot of drops of water, but at some point it reaches its capacity. And if we think of, even in the course of a day, a week, or our lifetimes, right, this dripping of the water in the glass, right, our systems are designed to handle that, right? I mean, just by virtue of having these two branches of our nervous system, sympathetic and then the parasympathetic, which I think of as the parachute branch of our nervous system that helps bring us back, right, into a more baseline neutral state. That's life, right? We have these moments that are stressful and we regulate. And to bring the metaphor to like a day or a week in the life, if we're not focusing on regulating, and many of us do actually need to be consciously focusing on it, either through a meditation practice or exercise or even just relaxing, right? Just making a intentional plan to sit and relax, be with people you love, co-regulate with them, take a walk in the woods. It actually doesn't have to be much, but that mindfulness is really helpful, right? And so without that, as that eyedropper continues to drop water into our glass, if we're not constantly nurturing ourselves, that glass can overflow. And it can be like, to really start throwing more metaphors in, right? We talk about that poor frog getting boiled, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't know what's happening until it's too late. And I think that is absolutely what I experienced and what I think a lot of people can experience in this 9-to-5 work world that, let's be honest, is very rarely 9 to 5, not these days at least.
Yeah. And I can very much relate to that. I've gone through that myself in the corporate world, sort of twice. First, when I was an employee in a big tech company, just really got to that point of feeling a constant sense of overwhelm and not sleeping very well anymore. And I got all kinds of strange health issues because of it too, really not understanding what was going on. And at the time, somebody introduced me to mindfulness, and that helped me become a little bit the observer of the situation, so I could step out just enough to realize I needed to try again in the same industry, but on my own. So I was a little bit more in control, and I was able to build a really successful consulting business for 16 years. But I was in and out of that stress, and it was really hard to navigate it until finally I realized that there is something else, like something that my soul feels more aligned with. So I know you came to that point where you were like, okay, this is enough. I need to really align more with my purpose and do something that has more meaning so I can spend the next few decades of my professional life doing something that is going to keep me in my parasympathetic nervous system or in a regulated nervous system. So what exactly happened that was that pivoting moment where you switched from one way of your career to another way?
Yeah. Thank you. It really wasn't a moment. And you said a few things there, so my mind is in a few places, but I think...
Yeah, and please feel free to respond to any of it, and we can always come back to something else later.
Yeah, okay. I feel like for me, I did start to realize, well, let me back up. My first master's degree is in tax accounting. And that, of course, was something I pursued because it was very practical. And there were elements of it that I liked. I was really fascinated by the law and interpreting the law. And I really liked the system of rules and checks and balances. So I didn't go into it blindly. And I didn't love it as a career. But what it did instill in me was a sense of strategy and caution that I do actually think are very much me, very much a part of who I am. And so when I started to really come to terms with the fact that I was essentially living in a very dysregulated state, and that was in large part because my work, which was taking up, of course, most of my waking life, wasn't feeling in alignment with my purpose, I was not ready to just make a change, right? To just pull off that Band-Aid and pursue something new. My need for proceeding strategically and planfully really came into the forefront. So when I started to realize I can't keep doing this, I started experimenting, and they were really small experiments at first. I started taking on some coaching clients. One of the things I realized, when I was referring earlier to those things that I called tasks that were really lighting me up, was also those opportunities that I had as a leader to mentor people, to support them in their problem solving, to celebrate successes with them, to help them think through challenges that they were having. And so in addition to my day job, so to speak, I was working with individuals in supporting them navigating their professional lives, which I found incredibly rewarding. But because I was also still working a day job, it wasn't something that I was throwing my whole self into, right? It wasn't something that I was building intentionally as a business that I could then pivot to. And it still, while it felt good, it still wasn't fully it. I think I felt like while I was leveraging my experience, the wisdom that I had gained from spending almost 25 years navigating corporate spaces and sharing that and being inspired by helping others solve their problems, it wasn't quite enough, right? This nervous system stuff that we're talking about wasn't part of the equation. It wasn't enough of a whole person approach. I realize again in hindsight that it just wasn't quite it. So other changes that I was making, just these little changes that felt like, at the margins of my life, right? Instead of this holistic pivot, I moved industries. I experimented with working in an arts organization. I was interim managing director of a theater here in Seattle, which was amazing and lined up with so many of my interests in theater, in the arts, in supporting nonprofits. It's such a beautiful community. I thought maybe that would address some of the unmet needs that I had working in that space. And while it was wonderful, it came with its own stresses that I felt like, well, I'm just kind of replacing one set of challenges that were not allowing me the space that I needed to regulate with a new set. So it felt like, okay, that's maybe not the answer. And it really wasn't until my last attempt at doing essentially the same thing that I had always been doing, but just a little bit differently, that I did see the pattern. These small changes weren't enough. They weren't getting me to where I needed to be.
I'm curious what the pattern was. What did you recognize?
I can say it now. I don't even know if I would have said it at the time, but I wasn't being bold enough. Felt great. They were very good experiments. They really were. And very much in alignment, again, with that planful, strategic style that I have always had, right? Starting way back when I was practicing accounting before moving into other more programmatic focused roles. But the changes weren't big enough. And that's the pattern. That is the pattern. And it wasn't until I made the biggest change of all, which was to entirely leave. At the time I was jokingly, but actually pretty sincerely saying, I've retired. I've retired from corporate America. And it wasn't until I said those words and threw myself fully into pursuing another master's degree, this time in counseling psychology, so that I could do the work that I'm doing now wholly, right? Not just dipping a toe in, not just saying, hey, I'm here to support people, hit me up. But actually, I have a full business. I am fully trained and I am leaning into this completely.
Wow, that must have taken so much courage to really acknowledge that and say that and quote unquote come out as I'm done with the corporate world. This is my truth. This is what I need to do in the world. And then putting everything towards that to make that a reality and really going through a whole new round of education to get yourself there. And yeah, that takes a lot. I really want to acknowledge that courage that you had to do that and how amazing that you're already at the other end of that. And now we're having the conversation.
It feels so great to be here. And I love that phrasing. Yes, it really was a coming out. It absolutely was. I think trying to maintain the old familiar things, 9-to-5 job really being the structure of it, but a 9-to-5 job being done in a certain way. Leaving that behind really was was that coming out. This is not for me anymore. And I appreciate you saying it was brave. And I can see in hindsight, yes, I also have to say that in many ways, I felt like it was my only option because I had exhausted the others. And while I could have continued experimenting maybe for years with trying different types of consulting, different ways of forming partnerships to offer services that felt a little bit more in alignment with my purpose and felt more fulfilling, I don't know if those small steps would have added up, right, to where I am now. So something did have to give.
I'm just thinking of a metaphor right now. The toothpaste came out of the tube and you just couldn't put it back inside.
I couldn't.
Yeah.
I absolutely couldn't. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's happening to so many people right now. And then it's like, what's that next step? So if you were to advise somebody who's listening, who's in a similar position that you are right now, who feels trapped and doesn't really know yet how to take that step, what advice would you give them on how to get closer to even identifying what that next thing is and how to potentially go there? Because there is a lot of fear associated with that because we need money in this paradigm that we're living in. And so giving everything up to find something else. Some people they're stuck in their career because they have a certain paycheck that's the minimum that they need to make. And again, we're talking first world problems here, but the mortgage, the car, the children, all the things, and now they're stuck. What advice would you give somebody who's feeling stuck and is interested in going towards more of their purpose and really doesn't know how to get there right now?
Yeah, there's a course that I took a few years ago now called The Trauma of Money. And it was an amazing, I think, 16 weeks of intensive deep dive discussion about how trauma impacts our relationship with money. And there's sort of two ways to think about this, right? Our past experience influences how we perceive money in our lives, whether it's something that we want to hoard, whether it's something we feel a scarcity relationship with, whether it's something that we feel like we can't be trusted with and we need to get it out of our lives as quickly as possible. And that can be caused both by our lived experience that maybe has nothing to do with money, or we can actually have circumstances in our lives that have everything to do with money, being raised in scarcity or abundance, for example, that impacts our relationship. So without trying to go too far down that path, I absolutely love the Trauma of Money fundamentals and encourage anybody to look it up. There's a great website and now a book written by the founder about this if it seems interesting to you. But to really, step one, understand your relationship with your finances, to know what do I think I need and how can I manage those needs and those wants and how long do I need to manage that, right? And having that understanding is, especially for me, was really foundational. One of the first steps that I took before starting to explore moving away from, as you very correctly pointed out, that safety, that steady paycheck that you almost don't even think about, right? It's direct deposited. We live now in a society where we don't even have to take that physical paycheck and put it in the bank. We just see those numbers appear on a regular basis. So before I made my change, one of my first stops was to speak with my financial advisor and really look at what I had, what I thought I needed, what I actually needed, and to understand that circumstance so that I could then go to the second step, which was make a careful plan. And I recognize, yes, I'm bringing a skill set, many, many years working in accounting, working in strategic planning and budgeting. So for me to sit down and put together a spreadsheet, a very detailed, probably unnecessarily, if I'm being honest, detailed spreadsheet about what I was going to need over the coming years, that was also really helpful. And to be fair, I had a really good time with it. Some people might think that is sick, but I know that there'll be some people listening there who are smiling and nodding because they too also enjoy the calm and peace of mind that comes from a good spreadsheet, but to have that plan as well. Those two things, right? Understanding my personal relationship with money, trying to resolve that a little bit, right? Where do I feel anxiety that is real? Where do I have a sense of scarcity, maybe that I need to actually be worried about? There are bills, there are things that I need in my life, shelter that are not negotiable. And where do I have a sense of want that maybe I can reconsider? Right? And that want as well. And I want to just pause on that because that, I think, back to the mindset that we are all in living in capitalism, we do have this idea that we need to be consuming more, that we need to be upgrading constantly. And while, yeah, sure, in some cases that might be true. I had a number of appliances in my home break down that, of course, all at once and that I had to replace. Those upgrades were needed in my life. I'm a person who would like to have a refrigerator in their home. But then understanding how much of that need for consumption isn't actually based in a true need. It's based in a sense that we might have an internal hole that we're trying to fill with that consumption. So I'm saying all this in the matter of a few minutes, like that's all you have to do. For some folks, that's a lot of work, right? That's absolutely, maybe even in some cases, years of therapy. But I
believe for most people, it's a lot of work. But yeah, it's good that you're summarizing it and really able to point to changing your relationship to money and how much you actually need and what that means in terms of your happiness.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I know we actually talked about the happiness trap.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious, what is that? How do you see that?
I love that. And it is such a great pivot because I think that ties so beautifully to this concept, right? The happiness trap is a concept and a book by Dr. Russ Harris, who works in a therapeutic modality called acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT. And it's something I absolutely love. It's a beautiful blend of behaviorism and values that I bring up often in my conversations with my clients. And the happiness trap is this sense, and again, I'll just keep pointing to capitalism, right? We have this pervasive idea that a good life is one in which we're happy constantly, right? And then that happiness can be supported, again, by this consumption. This is really how marketing works, right? Are you unhappy? Here, buy this thing, you'll be happy. And of course, being happy is the purpose of life, and you ought to be happy. And if you're not happy, get happy. And here's how, for 10 easy payments of $29.95. And the reality is, we're actually not built to be happy all the time. That is literally not our baseline. Our baseline is safety.
Mm-hmm.
Happiness is the cherry on top of that. So when we start to get caught up in chasing constant happiness, and the danger of this is not only is constant happiness not achievable, but we can then start to wonder, what's wrong with me? I'm not happy all the time. Clearly I'm broken. Clearly I need something to fix that. And we can start chasing our own tail in that way. And so the more aware we can become of our discomfort, which is also like happiness, something that is inevitable, right? But is not going to be our constant state. And we can learn to sit with wherever we are, practicing acceptance. Today is a uncomfortable day, or I'm in a situation that is uncomfortable, or the opposite. Today is a happy day, or I'm in a situation that's allowing me happiness. And recognizing that, of course, the mindfulness metaphor is our emotions being the weather and ourselves being the sky, and that the weather comes and goes, but ourselves is always what we have available. And that self, that baseline is not happy. It's safe.
Safety. Yeah, that really, really lands for me. Just, feeling safe. And from that place, we can then choose how we want to show up in the world. Yeah. So how do we get safe in our nervous system?
Yeah, this is the meat of the work that I get to do now. And this is why I really love having this therapeutic style relationship with my clients. We get to really think about this stuff. The long answer that I won't offer now is that we're all different and we need to experiment and we need to spend the time to learn where our edges are. The very short answer is that there are so many practices that we can engage in to regulate ourselves throughout the day and to try to both expand that window of tolerance where we can very easily find ourselves back in a safe baseline, even when we get knocked off our feet by something, that car cutting you off in traffic or conflict with colleagues, right? Where we can get back into that safety. And I think the best nervous system work and the work that I do in DBT, in the therapeutic modality that I'm intensively trained in and that I'm working predominantly in with many of my clients, we focus on two types of nervous system regulation. I think I said this was going to be a short answer. This is not the short answer.
Oh, I think this is exactly the place to give the long answer. I'm really curious about what that looks like. I know you've talked about DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy.
Yes, exactly.
I'm really curious what it is because you talk really highly about it.
Yeah, I love it. And it speaks to my process-oriented parts, right, that really like to have a system and a structure. And it is both of those things. But also beautifully, it is nested in mindfulness. Dr. Marsha Linehan, the researcher here at the University of Washington in Seattle, who developed this therapy over the last 30, close to 40 years now, I think, also, incidentally, in the course of her research, took time to sit in retreat at Zen monasteries. And over the years, ultimately became a Zen master, not because she set out to become a Zen master, but just because she had done so much work that she became one. From her beautiful autobiography, she, writes that they essentially said, well, this isn't really your choice anymore. We're going to make you a Zen master. And I love that. There's a dialectic actually there, even in just the nature of the therapy. It's a very science, evidence-based, process-oriented therapy. And its backbone is Zen. Just accepting what is, just being in a there you are sort of state. So I'm going to offer a little bit of my own overview of DBT. We don't specifically and explicitly in DBT talk about top-down and bottom-up nervous system regulation techniques, but that is essentially what's going on. Top-down meaning techniques that we use that involve our prefrontal cortex, right? Analysis, thinking clearly, problem solving, making decisions. Bottom-up regulation being processes that we use that really bypass thinking altogether. Things like paced breathing, or something we talk about a lot in DBT and encourage people to do, progressive muscle relaxation, which is just a very systematic way of tensing and releasing various muscle groups throughout your body as a way of stimulating your parasympathetic nervous system and offering a soothing response when you're feeling activated. I literally have a 400-page manual actually right next to me on my desk here, outlining most of these techniques. And really the goal is, of course, to encourage people to leverage mindfulness skills, to tune in, to be able to observe their inner state, describe it, and then participate fully in that awareness and using that awareness to understand where you are. Am I highly activated right now? Am I feeling deeply relaxed right now? And is there discomfort in whatever state I'm in? And if there is, then pulling out one of these skills that we teach to address that discomfort to help bring you to a more easeful state of being.
That's so fascinating to me. And almost all of my guests recently have been talking about mindfulness and meditation and really coming back to that place. And there's this real spiritual part that gets unlocked when we start becoming mindful and slowing down and becoming more aware of what's here now rather than getting trapped in all the other things. So in terms of spirituality, do you feel like part of your spiritual progression led you there, or were you already part of the mindfulness practices before you got there? Because now you're really merging both. Earlier on, you mentioned how you had these little glimpses of what your life could be like by mentoring people and things like that. And it feels like that's really when you tapped into that present moment, into that mindfulness. And so what was your journey to aligning more with that spiritual part of you?
You know, interestingly, if we'd had this conversation 10 years ago, I would have said, oh, yeah, I've got mindfulness practices. I've practiced yoga since I was 17 years old. I understand how to meditate. I participate in ceremony. I understand what it means to take a break and be with myself. And really now, in just the last few years, as I've been deepening my study of mindfulness and also making the space that I didn't know that I needed from all of the dysregulation that I was experiencing in the previous way that I was living my life, I'm able to do things that I've always done, like go to a yoga class, but connect so much more deeply with being present in the moment. And I think if I had to say what changed, why am I all of a sudden finding myself able to feel like I'm cracking myself open while in downward dog now versus getting a great stretch 10 years ago, but not having that same spiritual connection to the moment. And I would say that clearing out that energy in my nervous system by giving myself permission to rest, by allowing myself to truly feel safe and not feel safe because I'm in the familiar high anxiety, nervous space, but feeling safe because I truly am. That's what allowed me to become where I am able to be now, to be more present in my body, to be more connected to who I am and ergo my purpose. And as I'm saying this, I feel like, is there a chicken or egg problem here? I mean, am I able to do this now because I noticed that I needed to clear the static in my nervous system? Or by clearing the status in my nervous system, did that pave the way? And I don't know if it really matters which came first. I think the facts of the situation are what matter. And that is, I took a step back, and by taking that step back was able to observe, I'm not comfortable and I don't want to continue to be uncomfortable. I'm going to start taking steps to be more comfortable. And then somewhere along the way, that deeper connection with myself emerged.
That's really fascinating to me. Several people have approached me lately and they said, how can I get a quote unquote spiritual awakening? I've been listening to your podcast and I'm curious how to have that myself. And for the most part, the people I've been talking to, it just kind of spontaneously happens. Something caused something for them to have that realization, to come back to that self that you're talking about. With you, it seems like it was very much just like doing taxes. It was very calculated. It's like I'm taking a next step, a next step, a next step. And because I'm starting to go through this quote unquote protocol, right? The WakeUp Protocol, eventually I achieve the state where I can find myself increasingly more in these places of mindfulness, of presence, of now. When I say that, what comes up for you?
The word safety. Absolutely. And creating that safety for myself. You know, you raised it when you brought up the very real financial element to making a big change like this. And while I have all the respect for people who can just take that leap right into the void, for me, I needed to have an actual literal spreadsheet with my numbers in it. To see I'm safe. I'm safe. I will be able to pay bills. And I'll be able to do that for a period of time. And this is that window. And that window is comfortable to me. And to be fair, more than achievable, my need for safety required knowledge that there was padding, there's a buffer there, right? And so that safety, of course, the financial safety, but then the safety in my relationships, right? Knowing that saying I'm leaving my job, I'm stepping away from my career wouldn't, and I recognize saying this out loud, it almost sounds silly, but wouldn't have led to rejection by my peers or my social group, right? It wouldn't be, oh, Mary's just quitting her job. Forget her, right? So some safety there, safety with my family, that was really important to me as well. Making this announcement that I'm making this change would land well with my loved ones. And then the safety with myself, giving myself permission to take a risk and not actually know what's coming out the other side, right? Know that, sure, I can plan and touch base and check in with people. You're not going to reject me if I make this choice, right? I've got this money in the bank. This will be fine. But then also just the safety with myself that, okay, I've planned for everything that I think I need to. And at some point, I have to stop planning and start just trusting the process. And the key to trusting the process was trusting myself.
And so how did you get to that place of being able to trust yourself?
I'm seeing the theme here that this is all over time, that I think so much evidence piled up that I have been able to make decisions. I've gotten myself this far that when I started to let go of a sense that I had to live up to expectations of our culture, right? I'll say it again, of capitalism, right? To live up to external standards of success. When I started to realize that I know what I need to be happy, that was when that sense of trust really started to grow.
Yeah. It's interesting how it's all coming back to safety, happiness, trust, and yeah, really taking that inspired action towards purpose.
Yeah. When you say all that, I feel like, yeah, that's a regulated nervous system that we're talking about.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen the change in you over the years. It's remarkable. And as I always say in this podcast, it's a spiral. We go through the round and then we start all over again. But each time we're at a higher level. And so that is just something to remind myself of that, yeah, I've done this before and I can do this again. I have a couple questions right now for you, which is the core questions of this podcast. One is spiritual awakening. What's your definition of that?
And keeping it with my own process, well, I've had so many beautiful moments in my life that have felt like thunderclaps, right? Which are just, I think I used the phrase, the cherry on top. Just such delicious moments that really make life worth living. I think my own awakening has been a long, gentle, and gradual process, punctuated here and there by the thunderclaps, but using the nervous system regulation as almost a metaphor, right? Having these big moments, but then coming back to the baseline of, okay, it's my journey and I'm on this path. And so for me, my spiritual awakening has really been a process of one foot in front of the other and enjoying those big, beautiful moments along the way, but slow and steady. And I'm smiling as I say that because I recognize that there's maybe some safety in there, right? Something I appreciate. And also, I think that maybe by saying that and thinking of it, by framing it that way, it's also allowing opportunity for more, right? My awakening for me has been a long journey and it's not over yet.
It's not a destination.
No, it truly isn't. And I just can't wipe this smile off my face as I'm saying it, because how beautiful is that, right? That we get to continue to walk this path and continue to evolve as we go.
I'm getting goosebumps hearing that. Yeah, that's really beautiful. There's so much more and it just keeps expanding. And with each collapse, we know that there's another expansion in front of us as well, as long as we're in this body. So what are some of the tools that you use personally? And maybe also some of the tools you are using with your clients or patients? Do you call it clients or patients?
I spent almost 2 years working in a medical facility, a residential and partial hospitalization program. And because of the medical model, we'll refer to them as patients.
Okay.
But in my clinical work, in the DBT practice that I'm part of, and then in my private practice, we think of them as clients.
Okay.
Yeah,
so
and I like that
some
question.
of the practices that you're using, I would like for you to maybe start with your personal practices.
Yeah, absolutely. For me, I'm realizing more and more how important connection to my physical body is. I've always loved dancing, whether out with people, co-regulating with others on a dance floor or at home in my kitchen, sometimes holding my cat. I've always had cats that dance with me. Co-regulating with them as well. It's amazing how comfortable an animal will get when you're sort of rhythmically moving with them as well, I'm realizing. But that movement practice has now become a staple for me, which, something I considered, I love doing this. It's so much fun. I can do it anytime, anywhere. All it takes is rhythm, either in music I'm listening to or even just something in my head. But now I see it more as something that I actually need in my life. I need dance. I need to fling my limbs about in a rhythmic or not so rhythmic fashion to release energy in my nervous system. I participate in something called Dance Church, which I really love. It's not denominational by any means, but the church element is to honor that it is something done in a focused way, in a room with other people, in community. And I like to say, if you don't cry at least once during dance church, are you even doing dance church? And I do love that. And I maybe will develop a deeper theory around why that happens one of these days. But, most recently I noticed, and it was such a pleasant surprise. I hadn't had my, momentary tears moment of weeping during dance church. And there was a young man behind me who at one point just let out a whoop just with the music. Something shifted in the music, and it was just an expression of joy. And even remembering that moment, I'm feeling a little emotional. It just got me, just that sense of connection to others and doing this really goofy thing. Dance church is by no means focused on beautiful dance moves. It's really just the act of moving your body. That's a really big one for me. And I'm clearly, as I'm talking about it, I'm noticing I have a lot to say about it. I'm really passionate about it. Other things along those lines, the yoga allows more stillness is so important. There's so much information that comes to us in those moments of stillness. So that's a big part of how I pursue regulation and balance in my life.
Nice.
And I practice what I preach. I really do. I think it makes me a better therapist to have done the exercises, to embody the skills that I teach to my clients. And I adopt a student approach where I can learn from my clients when they share their experience of using the skills that I teach, which deepens my understanding and the opportunity of how these skills can impact us. And so in DBT, I think I already mentioned, we have two sets of skills, the top-down, the more strategy-focused skills to help keep your nervous system regulated. One of my favorites is something that we call cope ahead, which is literally what it sounds like. If you anticipate a stressful moment in your life, take some time. Do some visualization. What's it going to look like? What will you say? How will you keep yourself composed? What of the bottom-up regulation skills might you use? What sort of breathing might you do? What goals do you have in that situation? How might you ensure that if it gets stressful, you have a plan to take care of yourself? Through these strategic ideas like cope ahead, we can ensure that even when life gets stressful, even when we find ourselves at the top of our window of tolerance or even knocked into a state of hyper-arousal, something we haven't talked about, hypo-arousal, right? Which is when we get into a shutdown state, which is also something that can happen when our systems become overwhelmed. How will we handle that? And just by virtue of having a plan, and there's so much research that shows that just by thinking ahead about something, it's why we do fire drills, right? When that big moment comes, when there's actually smoke, if you know where the exit is and have actually walked through the process of putting everything down, walking to that exit and leaving the building, you're going to do that in a much calmer manner than you would if you hadn't done that dress rehearsal and you smell smoke and you're trying to problem solve in the moment while you're also fearing for your life.
I love that metaphor of the fire drill. And it's so it's so Mary, being really organized and knowing exactly what to do when, and really working with your clients and getting them to that place. We're recording this in early December, actually almost mid-December at this point. And I'm really going to do my darndest to get this episode out before your offering. You're going to have a course coming up in January. And I would like for you to maybe share a little bit what that's going to be about and how people can find you.
Thank you. I'm really excited about this. I have an incredible colleague, Rachel Harper, who's also a psychotherapist, and we're launching an 8-week mindfulness in perimenopause and menopause group. And it's for women navigating the emotional and physical shifts of this stage of life. So for women who are overwhelmed and curious or feeling alone or just want a space to connect with others on this path, these are the types of people we would like to see join the group. Every week it will be virtual, and we'll explore mindfulness and emotion regulation and self-compassion, which is something we haven't talked a lot about, but I think that's a really critical component to so much of this nervous system regulation work, if we find ourselves in a pattern of shaming ourselves for our big feelings, that very quickly becomes a recursive loop. And so self-compassion becomes a really critical tool. So that will be covered here as well. So yeah, folks that join the group will have practical tools to manage tough moments and hopefully find a way to have a little more ease in their lives.
Sounds like a really powerful offering. And when does that start, and how can people find you?
Yeah, that'll start at the end of January, and anyone interested can reach out to me through my website, www.cadera.me. That's my last name, CADERA.me. And you can contact me there, and I can send you more information, answer questions, and get people signed up if they're interested.
Sounds great. And I'll make sure to put a link in the show notes to that.
Thank you.
We're coming to the end of this conversation, and I have a final question for you. If you could go back in time and give a message to a younger version of you, what would you tell her?
I think I would encourage her. Oh, this feels so tender. I would encourage her to trust the process. I think I've spent a lot of time embracing that concept in the later part of my life. And I recognize that I might have found more ease in my earlier years, knowing that trusting the process is a key to some emotional freedom.
Beautiful message. And so it is. Thank you, Mary, for sharing your story and being such an inspiration and really plowing the path ahead for many to step into and see that it is possible, that there is another track that we can step into if we clearly plan, if we feel safe in general, and if we have a clear vision of where we want our lives to take. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nadja. It's been such a joy to talk with you today.
Thank you so much for tuning into the Wake Up Protocol. If you like what you heard, share this episode with 3 people who need to hear this message. And if you want to go deeper, head to thewakeuprotocol.com and sign up for our email list. That's where we share behind the scenes insights, bonus resources, exclusive invites, and the kind of guidance we only send to our community. And if this is the last thing you hear from us, all we'd like to say is keep going, trust yourself, follow your heart. Until next time, have a safe and happy journey.